Welcome to this Kangxi radicals course. We will go through each radical in turn with some examples of their use, mostly from the Neijing. I aim to choose examples of characters that are common and useful, so if you wish, you can use these videos to learn and expand your classical medical Chinese vocabulary. But I am pacing this for people who have not encountered the Chinese language before, so I may go through some stuff that you know already, and I think this is probably quite a useful thing. Life and learning are a spiral of growth. Nature expresses itself through spiralic structures, and we go through a cycle of study, then return to the beginning, but on the next level. Many people have asked me if this course will teach them how to read classical medical Chinese. I fear no one course of 40 weeks can do this, but I can give you the building blocks on which to establish your study. You can take as much or as little as you want from this. It's entirely up to you. As we go round the spiral again and again, gradually you'll pick up and consolidate many more things. When we've been through the whole 214 Kangxi radicals, and believe me, this seems like an enormous task, and looked at all these many Neijing texts, you will have a firm foundation on which to build your understanding of classical medical texts. I need to tell you that I will give my literal and rough translations of the texts. Chinese characters have many layers of meaning, so there is no definitive translation. Classical Chinese was also originally without punctuation and very terse, so again, it's even more likely that differing translations are possible. I also want to emphasize that we're in this together, and I look forward to learning and discussing more with you. I want to give you some background on the Kangxi radicals, and you also have this Unicode sheet which talks all about them. The system of 214 Kangxi radicals is based on a much older system of 540 radicals, which was used in the Han era Shuowenjiezi. This is the Shuowenjiezi, which means explaining simple graphs and analysing compound characters, which came out in 121 CE. And you can see here that these were the proto-radicals that were in the Shuowenjiezi. The Kangxi radicals were originally introduced in 1615, but they're usually named in relation to the dictionary, the Kangxi dictionary. Kangxi is the era when it came out, and it came out in 1716. So this says Kangxi Ci Dian. Ci means character. The radicals, or Bu Shou means head or leader part, or something like section headings, are numbered in stroke count order. So, you have all the radicals that have 1 stroke, then all the radicals that have 2 strokes, all the radicals that have 3 strokes, and so on. You can see that here, for instance, in the Kangxi dictionary that you've got here. See this circle here? That's the number 2. So it's telling us that now there are going to be a whole load of radicals that are made up from 2 strokes. And here's an example. This one here, for instance, is an example. 1, 2, 2 strokes, for instance. The Kangxi radicals are the most popular system of radicals for dictionaries to order traditional Chinese characters, which are ordered first by radical and then by stroke count. Modern Chinese dictionaries continue to use the Kangxi radical stroke order, both in the traditional Ci Dian, which is the character dictionaries, and also in the more modern Ci Dian, which is the word or phrase dictionary. These 214 Kangxi radicals act as a de facto standard, although they may not all be duplicated exactly in every modern Chinese dictionary, as some of the more obscure Kangxi radicals form characters that are no longer in frequent use. So what are radicals? Well, radicals are the way to find characters in a Chinese dictionary. A radical can be the whole character, or it can be on the left, underneath, on top of, to the right, or all around a character. And here you can see a whole load of examples. For instance, this can be a character on its own to talk about a plant with a head, a grain head that is heavy and so is hanging down. But it can also be a radical, and it can be on the left of the character, or here, for instance, this bit here is a radical that actually comes from the character water, and when it's used as a radical we write it like that, and you can see here it's on the left hand side. Or for instance here, this is a character for the heart, and here you can see that it's underneath. Or it can be all around. For instance here, this is the character for a door, men, and here you can see that it's around something else. And you may have noticed that I've jumped the gun a bit, because a radical can take different forms depending on where it is on in the character. For instance, I gave you an example just now that this is the character for water, but when we use it as a radical, we often see it like this. Or I gave you the example of the heart, a heart as a character, and sometimes it remains like this, but sometimes it can be written like this. Or for instance, this is the character for grass, and actually in the Kangxi radicals it's like this, but often we see it in a simplified form like this. Or another one, this is the character for fire, and often we see it underneath things as these 4 little dots. Or this is the character for speech, and sometimes we see it, well, this is a modern simplification, but in the traditional characters we often see it at the side, at the beginning of a character like this. Or this is the character for the hand, and when it's a radical it's like this. Or this is the character for a foot, and we often see it like this. And here is the character for the human, and this is often written as a radical like that. In your intro folder there's also an extra file from Viga, who Viga was a French Jesuit priest who used the Shuowenjiezi as the basis of a so-called etymology, not really etymology because the Shuowenjiezi already wasn't real etymology, but used it as a way to learn the Chinese language through the radicals. And this sheet has got an awful lot of information on it. So along the top, I've just got a part of the sheet here to show you what I'm talking about. Along the top here, see these dotted lines? This tells you how many strokes there are in the radicals that are encompassed by this dotted line. And the dotted line starts and finished with this slightly curved edge. You can see that it doesn't have a curved edge here because obviously it's the 6 stroke radicals continues on the next line. Each radical is in a box, and in that box there is the Kangxi radical number, and in the same box it also has a short description. For instance, here it says bamboo, so it tells us that this radical here is the radical for bamboo. And there's some examples on the right here, and these are unfortunately extremely difficult to read, very small, but that's okay because we're going to use lots of other examples, so it doesn't matter too much. And in the top right hand corner there is also an example of alternative forms of the radical. So for instance here the character is Lao, but sometimes you might see just this bit without the extra bit. And for example here we have this character here which is the net, and quite often it's shortened in this way rather than being the net, which is something like this. That's just to give you an example of alternative forms of the radical. Or another one that we will see an awful lot of, this is the silk radical, and this is in its full form, but often we see it at the beginning of something and then we see it more like that. For instance here, This is the character for Jing, channel. So why do we care about learning radicals? Well, one of the main reasons, apart from trying to read a dictionary, is that many Chinese characters are formed by joining a radical with a phonetic. A phonetic is the sound, of course. So as we go through the radicals, you will see how changing the radical but with the same phonetic component has similar sounds but different meanings. This is one of the uses of learning the radicals, as you can easily make a stab at its meaning just through knowing the radical. Here are some examples. So the phonetic is yan, which means inflammation. Not all phonetics have a meaning on their own, but quite a lot of them do. So here you can see that this yan, inflammation, with different radicals, has lots of different meanings and slightly different pronunciations. We can have tan, which sounds exactly the same, except it's got a t instead of a y in front. And if it's got the speech in front, then it means to chat or to discuss. If it's got this thing here, which is the illness radical, then it means inflammation with illness, phlegm. If it's got this thing here, which is the radical for fur or sort of furry stuff, skin, stuff like that, then it means a blanket or a rug. And if it's got the heart radical in front, then it means to burn. If it's got the metal radical in front, then it's a lance or a spear. So it's something made out of metal that causes inflammation, maybe. And if it's got the grass on the top, then it's a specific plant that is a feather grass. You can also have other radicals in front that change the meaning from the sound from yan to a d sound. So you've got dan, which is with the water radical, it means something that is thin or bland in taste. Or with the mouth radical, it means to eat or to taste. And here you have it with the original sound yan, with the flame, with fire on top, lots of flames means flame. And with this jade radical, then it's talking about a specific type of jade. I just want to tell you a little bit about pronunciation and transliteration. First of all, let's talk about pronunciation. My pronunciation is not very good, but I'm happy to give it a go. There are 4 tones, plus a neutral one, the so-called 5th tone. These sound like this. Ah, 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 ah. And they're written like this. Ah, 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 ah. I find this quite a good way of showing how the tones work. But maybe you'll find this way a more useful way of looking at the tones. Ma, 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 ma. In actuality, classical Chinese didn't have tones, and it's thought that the characters were not pronounced as they are nowadays anyway. If you're interested in this, then have a look on work on early and medieval Chinese by Bernard Karlgren and Axel Schwessler. I also want to mention something about transliteration, because this is an area of immense confusion. This is why, for instance, in old books, when you look at the way that the character chi is transliterated, it used to be written like this, but now it's written like this. So the character is exactly the same. The old transliteration, this one, is known as the Wade-Giles transliteration, and the new one that has been in use since the Chinese Cultural Revolution is known as pinyin. I will be writing things in pinyin, just so you know. Now let's have a look at the concept of learning to read and write, or rather learning characters and how to write them. I'm sorry to say that the best way to learn to recognise Chinese characters and generally learn them, at least at the beginning, is by writing them out. I will write out each character that I'm focusing on as we go, and if you want to learn them, I suggest you write each one out a few times every day. This is boring and takes time, but the conjunction of head and hand fixes the characters much better in your mind. Chinese students, Chinese children, learn to write the characters using working within a graph paper booklet or exercise book, and I suggest that graph paper that is 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters to start off with, squares, is quite a good size to start with. It's a good size to have a nice large square to start with. So now I'm going to tell you about the rules for writing Chinese characters, so you've got something to go on. First rule is that Chinese characters are written from top to bottom. So here we have some examples. For instance, this is the character for speech or to talk, and this is the character for square or direction, and this is the character for tea. The next rule is that characters are written from left to right. So, for instance, here we go. We're going to write this character first, which is the human radical, and altogether this means position. Or, for instance, these two. This means a forest, 2 trees. Or, here we go. This is the character, one of the characters for red. Rule number 3, first the horizontal and then the vertical. Whoops. So here we go. This is a stem, or not yet, or the end, the tip. Rule number 4, first we go right to left, diagonals, then left to right, diagonals. So, for example, this is the character for 8, and this is the character for human, but this is the character for to enter. Rule number 5, the center comes first in vertically symmetrical characters. First, if vertically symmetrical. So, for instance, this is the character for water, or this is the character for small, or this is the character for tree. Rule number 6 says, move from the outside to the inside, outside to the inside, and close the frames last. This is an important one. So, for instance, here we have this one, and you can see there's an open frame, there's another open frame, shut this frame, shut this frame. this means to return or to reply. Here's another one. You put the stuff in the middle first and then you close the frame. That's a field. Or outside to inside, that's the outside. And this is the inside. That means to build or to construct. Rule number 7, upper left and upper centre dots come first. Upper left and upper centre dots come first. For example, this is 6, the number 6. This means culture, and this means to join or to meet. And the last rule, upper right and inside dots come last. Upper right and inside dots are last. So, for example, here we go. This is jade. This is to seek or to look for. This is a model or a pattern. Okay, so I hope that this is enough to start us off, and we can move on to the one-stroke radicals. Here we go.